So I think we've done has22 before, but and so the way that we did it before was, well, we said that if so the goal of this question was to just return true if there was a 2 next to a 2 somewhere in the array. And so what we did here was we said, okay, well, um, we're going to have a Boolean variable called has22, which is going to be set to false. It's going to signify if there's in fact a 2 next to a 2 somewhere. And so we use a for loop to iterate through the array. And as we do that, we can say, well, if we can say that if nums of I, that is, of course, any given element in the array is equal to 2, then we'll make another decision here, and we're going to increment I by 1, and then check if that element is equal to 2. So we'll check if that element is equal to 2. And if of course it is, then has22 is equal to true. Otherwise, it's equal to false. We're not going to specify that since has22 has a default of false. And just to avoid going out of bounds, but of course, after it's all said and done, we're going to return has22. And you'll see here that we'll actually be going out of bounds sometimes because we're walking off the edge of the array because we're not taking into account if 2 is actually the last element in the array. So if we do -1, then that should solve the problem, and that's how we did it. But there seems to be another way. Suppose we had a Boolean called has22, which is equal to false. The whole idea was to iterate through each element. Increment I by 1. And what we could do here is we could say, well, if nums of I is equal to 2 and nums of I plus 1 is equal to 2, and it's weird because I would assume that nums of I plus 1 is essentially adding on to the value of nums of I. I don't think that's essentially, well, maybe, yeah, actually, I guess this is accessing the index, so it's changing the index. So if the index here was, let's say, 3, and we had, let's say, 1, 2, so let's say we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boxes, and we had indexes corresponding with those boxes. And of course, these boxes are just boxes which we can put elements in. But if I was supposedly doing nums of sub 3, then I guess that would sort of assume that we're accessing the third index, and of course the box at the third index rather. And so if I were to do +1, then of course I would be accessing the second box, or the box that comes directly after the third index. And so I guess I could do I plus 1, which sort of moves me on to the next element. So if nums of I is equal to 2, and of course the next element after I is equal to 2, then we'll return true, else of course, or actually then we'll set has22 equal to true, right? Otherwise has22 is equal to false, but of course we don't need to specify that since that's the default value for has22. But then again, if we're only evaluating one statement, then we can just sort of return the statement itself, and so we can just return this entirely, and maybe we'd be fine. Ooh, it's missing a return statement, so we can't do that. So if nums of I is equal to 2, then return true, and of course if that's not returned, then we'll return false. Array index out of bounds exception. So again, that's happening because we're walking off the edge of the array. We're actually incrementing I by 1. And so we're not taking into account if 2 is at the very end of the array. See, here 2 is at the very end of the array, and we get an array out of bounds index error. So just because we're incrementing by 1, it could be that 2 is the last element. And so in order to sort of plan out that contingency, we do nums out length -1, and it takes care of it there.